possibly transmit to others. And that has been confirmed through studies, these very detailed investigations that are ongoing. What we're really trying to understand is the relative importance of when people transmit and how they transmit and the context in which. What we know is that this virus transmits through respiratory droplets from an infected person, most often when they have symptoms, but it can happen just before they develop symptoms or right at the time of them developing symptoms, meaning they're very, very mild. And it can happen when people are infected and don't develop symptoms at all. And so that makes control measures that much more challenging, which is why we make a comprehensive set of measures in place to be able to break chains of transmission, including making sure we find those cases that we know about, we find all of their contacts, and we quarantine those contacts. And by doing so, you effectively isolate people so they can't pass the virus to someone else, whether they have symptoms or not. And so what we really need to better understand is how often that is happening. How often does it happen that someone that doesn't have symptoms and never has symptoms transmits further? How important is it that someone just before they develop symptoms passes to someone else? And we know that is important. And how does that affect our control measures? The other thing that we spoke we need to spend much more time talking about are these events in which transmission occurs. We know that it happens between close contact with people, when they're within 1 meter of one another, when you have prolonged contact, that means more than just in passing. And we're quite alarmed by a number of super spreading events that are happening in a large number of different types of controlled, closed settings. So, for example, we've seen outbreaks in long-term living facilities, we've seen outbreaks in healthcare facilities, we've seen some clustering events and mass gatherings, and different types of religious events, in meat processing plants, in expatriate dorms. There's a number of settings where we need to do much more detailed analyses to really understand why and how transmission is occurring so that we can prevent this from happening going forward. And then just briefly on the wastewater. So this is an area of interest that we are looking at and that a number of countries are looking at to potentially look at testing of wastewater for the SARS-CoV-2 virus to see if that could be a sentinel signal for whether or not the virus is circulating. There are some papers that have come out recently, and we are aware of those papers. We've actually reached out to a number of those authors to get more details. Some of those are in preprint, which means they have not gone through peer review. And so we've reached out to those authors to really understand how they've conducted those studies and what those can inform us going forward. Benedetta, I don't know if you want to add anything about, okay.
Okay, thank you, Maria. We will now move to Kai Copperschmidt from Science. Kai, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you very much for taking my question. This one's probably for Anna Maria. I just wanted to ask whether there's any news on, first of all, the lopinavir-ritonavir arm of the Solidarity trial, given the results from recovery, and any discussion of how to move forward with, now that recruitment is going well, how to move forward, prioritizing the next drugs to test.
I think Anna Maria will respond. Thank you.
Thank you, Kai. So first on the Solidarity trial, we are very pleased with, and we're very grateful to all the researchers from the 31 countries who have now approvals for participation in the Solidarity trial. So they have the National Regulatory Authority approval and the Ethics Review approval. Of those, 21 are already randomizing hospitalized COVID patients in nearly 400 hospitals. And we have a global network of about 1,300 clinicians. So we are active in the 6 WHO regions. We are very pleased about that because that gives clinicians and researchers from all around the world the opportunity to contribute to the Solidarity trial. We are also very pleased with the increase in the recruitment rates. So we are now getting to 5,500 patients included in the trial. And unfortunately, we have high rates of transmission, but the good thing, and this was discussed during the forum, and encouraged by several of the speakers, is that given that the virus is moving around the planet and that the rates of transmission are uncertain, it is very important to use global platforms like the Solidarity Trial to be able to evaluate not only therapeutics but also vaccines, because that will allow us to have the therapeutics and the clinicians in the places where the incidence rate is high at the time of introduction. In terms of the results, there were two presentations on the data that is available, because it was important for the community to learn what we have learned from the therapeutics that have been evaluated so far. As you probably know, there are nearly 1,700 clinical trials that are registered. Unfortunately, the majority of these trials never started and were canceled, or recruited only a few hundred patients. So in total, there was an independent review that suggested that the three major trials contributing to the evidence for hydroxychloroquine, lopinavir, ritonavir, and the steroids, including dexamethasone, were the recovery trial from the UK, the active trials from the NIH, NIID, and the Solidarity trial led by WHO. Of this, there was a discussion of the preliminary results of these trials that suggest and confirm that hydroxychloroquine, unfortunately, doesn't have the positive effect that we were hoping on mortality for COVID patients. There were also discussions on the potential effect of lopinavir, and the preliminary data suggests that this effect is not there, but we are looking at the analysis. And then there was the discussions on how to look into the steroids. So the recovery trial results that are publicly available were again discussed, and WHO put forward a proposition for a full systematic review of the data on remdesivir and on steroids that will be shortly shared with the community, because we value and we think it's important for all of us to look at the integrated, critically appraised evidence. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna Maria. I will take now a question from